Hello and welcome to another episode of Develop with WP, a show where I try to teach others more about WordPress. In today's episode, we're going to look at a very useful function that is provided to you by WordPress, and that function is WP list pluck. But before we get into that, I have to tell you a quick story. Hopefully you're ready for a story. So this week, I actually was doing some work where I'm working on a slider, a customized slider that replaces the default gallery slider in WordPress. And in there, I had this situation where I had an array of attachments. So I had a bunch of images and all the associated data that goes with them. And I did a simple loop to go and pull that data out. But then in a code review, someone who did the code review was like, hey, why didn't you just use WP list pluck to do this? And I thought to myself, I was like, I don't know why I didn't use WP list pluck. It's a great function. I've used it numerous times, but as often is the case with me, I tend to just forget about most of those things that are there to help me, and I just do things on my own. But it was nonetheless, it was a good lesson, and I thought it would be a great thing to cover here because it is a very useful function. But yeah, so I mean, and as a side note too, the moment that you get into a situation where you're able to have people look at your code, the faster you will grow as a developer. And so, where I work now, I'm very fortunate that pretty much everything that we do gets code reviewed, and this was kind of a product of that. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so you can see here I've kind of simulated that situation I had earlier this week at work, and pretty much what I have here is just an array of objects, and you could you could say that this is like some post meta or some post data. And so our array has an ID, a title, an author, and a date. And what we want to do is we want to be able to just pull out one of the things here. So like we just want to get the title. And you've seen us do some of this recently when we were looking at array filter and array map. And we're actually going to touch back on one of those briefly in this video, but that'll be the second step. The first step is, okay, if I knew nothing about WordPress and I just had PHP at my disposal, what would be the most straightforward and simplistic way to get out the title? So let's go and look at that. The easiest way is to create a variable, we'll just call it temp, and it's just going to be an empty array. So that's a shorthand for an array. And then we would do a for each loop. And we would loop through our posts, and then we would take this temp array and we would just add to it each post and then say the title. All right, and that would give us all of the post titles, and then we could var dump this. And let's see what we get. There you go, and so you can see we get the titles. And that wasn't too hard. It wasn't really that hard at all. But WordPress does give us this function called WP list pluck. So let's see what that would look like. It would be something like this. You would just say like whatever you want your new array to be. We'll just call it new data equals WP list pluck. And WP list pluck has three parameters you can give it. But and only two of them are required. So we're just going to stick with the two that are required at first. And so the first thing you need to do is give it the array of data. So in this case, it's our posts array. And then you just tell it what you want. And we'll say we want the title. And maybe we should var dump that. I hear that helps. So we're going to var dump this new data. There you go. You see we get the exact same thing. So that's really cool. WP list plucked also has another very useful third parameter, and that parameter is essentially will set whatever the key is. So if you can see right here, this is just a standard array, so the keys are just numerically from 0 to 3 like you would expect. But we can tell it to go, while it's going and getting the title, we can say we want to use any of these other values to be the key. So for example, I could say I want to use the IDs as the key. And you'll see that now these change to be the actual IDs that correspond to those. So you could see where that could be a very useful thing in WordPress. One of the limiting things here though is the fact that you can only really pull out one value. So if you did need to do something where you needed multiple values, then the for each loop would probably still be your best bet. And the reason I say that is because you could do something like this, where you go, this is an array, and in here I'm going to get the title, and I also want to get the post author. And if we were to look at that, you would see that we get this array, this nice array where we have the title and the author associated with each one. So if you were in a circumstance where you needed to pull out multiple pieces of data, then the for each loop would be a great way to go. Another limiting factor with WP list pluck is also the fact that you can't do any type of conditional checking. So for example, you couldn't say, I only want titles that have the author of, Bobby Bryant, for example. You couldn't do any type of conditional checking with that. That's where something like we've done in the past with array map would be more useful. We could go and say map data equals array map and then array map, the first thing is the function. So function, this is our callback function. And then you're going to give it the posts. And then inside of this function, we can do whatever we want. So we could be like if Bryant equals data author, then return data title. So we're just saying, like, only if I'm the author do I want the title. So let's var dump that. All right, let me make my screen smaller. There, so you can see that now we're getting that. We're only getting the titles that we're wanting. You can see that there's these null checks in here, and that's really easy to fix. We did a lesson on array filter, but I didn't touch on this. But essentially, if you just pass something into array filter like that, what it'll do is it'll clean it all up. Essentially, this will just go ahead and get rid of any type of empty data set. So empty strings is a common need for this. You saw right here we had some nulls, some null values, and it removed those. So that's pretty cool. So these are just some different ways, but essentially if you just need to get the value, one value out of a huge array of different objects or arrays, it doesn't have to be objects, then WP list pluck is the function for you. If you needed to do something more complicated and you needed some type of conditional checking, then the array map and array filter and array reduce might be more what you would need. But nonetheless, WP list pluck is a very useful function that comes packaged in WordPress. So there you go. I hope you found this informative and useful. As always, share, like, tweet, subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comments. And until next time, have a wonderful WordPress day. Crank it up.